Hello. Signal is a protocol that provides robust end-to-end encryption for messaging apps. At a high level, two users establish a shared secret key using elliptic curve Diffie-Hellman ECDH, and they then use the shared secret key to encrypt and authenticate messages for each other using AES-GCM. The challenge is in authenticating the exchange ECDH public keys without relying on a trusted third party or a certification authority. Additionally, as we'll see, ensuring strong end-to-end encryption for billions of users of a messaging app poses many other challenges.
This lecture will use the following cryptographic elements: the AES block cipher, the CBC block cipher mode of operation, the SHA-256 hash function, HMAC, the curve 25519 elliptic curve, the elliptic curve Diffie-Hellman, or ECDH, key agreement protocol, and the EDDSA signature scheme, which is similar to ECDSA. You can learn more about these in our Crypto 101 Building Blocks course.
The Signal protocol was designed by Moxie Marlinspike and Trevor Perrin. It's free, open source, and its source code is available on GitHub. The Signal protocol is implemented in the Signal app, a free messaging app developed by the nonprofit Signal Foundation. The Signal app is popular among people who prioritize the privacy of their communications. The Signal protocol is also integrated into other message apps. Skype offers it as an optional feature called Private Conversations. WhatsApp uses Signal as its default security protocol. Facebook Messenger uses a protocol similar to Signal. In this lecture, I'll focus on how the Signal protocol is used in WhatsApp, specifically in the context of two users exchanging messages. I won't consider the scenarios where users exchange videos or have a phone conversation, or the more complex scenarios of group chats, which involve additional security challenges. WhatsApp is a messaging app owned by Facebook, which also owns Instagram. With over 3 billion users, it is the most widely used messaging app in the world, particularly popular in countries like India, Brazil, Indonesia, Mexico, France, and the UK. WhatsApp features strong end-to-end encryption, which has led to bans or temporary restrictions in some countries. While Facebook cannot access content of WhatsApp conversations, it does have access to metadata, such as who you message, the number of messages exchanged, your profile name, and other details. This metadata is potentially very valuable to Facebook. I'll begin by summarizing the main goals of the Signal protocol. There are 4 entities involved: Alice and Bob, who are the communicating parties; WhatsApp, the service provider that Alice and Bob trust to some extent; and an adversary Eve, which could be a powerful organization such as the NSA, a nation-state, or even WhatsApp itself. The first objective is to establish long-lived sessions. When Alice and Bob first connect on WhatsApp, they establish a long-lived secure communication session by establishing shared secret keys. Here, long-lived means that the session will remain active until either Alice or Bob reinstalls the app or gets a new phone. Additionally, every message exchanged between Alice and Bob is encrypted and authenticated using a fresh session key. This ensures that session keys are never reused. Signal employs an encrypt-then-MAC approach for authenticated encryption, using AES in CBC mode for encryption and HMAC for authentication. The session keys K1 and K2 are each 256 bits in length. Another crucial requirement is asynchronous messaging. This means that Alice should be able to send secure messages to Bob, even if Bob is offline. Messages might be delayed, arrive out of order, or even be lost. Yet, Bob should still be able to decrypt all messages he receives. For example, decrypting the third message from Alice should not depend on successful decryption of the second message, since the second message might never arrive. The fourth objective of Signal is immediate decryption, meaning Bob should be able to decrypt a message as soon as he receives it. This is related to the requirement for asynchronous communication. The fifth objective is end-to-end encryption. When Alice sends an encrypted message to Bob, only Bob should be able to decrypt it. Neither WhatsApp nor any third-party adversary should ever gain access to Alice's or Bob's secret keys. End-to-end encryption does not preclude WhatsApp from getting all the metadata of Alice's and Bob's communications. Signal provides forward secrecy, a concept we encountered in the video on TLS. If Alice's device is compromised, meaning an adversary gains access to all the data on her phone at some point in time, including Alice's secret keys, the messages she sent before the compromise should remain secure. Signal achieves forward secrecy by using elliptic curve Diffie-Hellman ECDH. Finally, Signal aims to achieve a new security property called post-compromise security. Even if an adversary at some point learns Alice's state, including all her cryptographic keys and session data, they still cannot decrypt future messages as long as they remain passive.
You should take a moment to reflect on these 7 objectives, as some of them seem extremely challenging, and achieving all 7 objectives at the same time might seem impossible. For instance, maintaining long-lived sessions seems to imply that Alice and Bob must store long-term secret keys. However, if an attacker manages to obtain these keys, how is it possible that they still cannot decrypt all future messages? In other words, how does Signal manage to achieve post-compromise security? Another challenge is session key freshness. Each message must be encrypted with a new session key, which complicates key management. Alice and Bob need to track which session key was used, for which message, while also handling complications, like simultaneous messages, out-of-order delivery, delays, and message loss. Lastly, there is the problem of authentication. How do Alice and Bob verify each other's ECDH public keys? Ideally, this would be done without relying on certification authorities, and more importantly, without trusting WhatsApp itself.
Forward secrecy in Signal is achieved through a technique known as ratcheting. Consider the scenario where Alice and Bob share an initial secret key K. They derive a sequence of message encryption keys MK1, MK2, MK3, and so on, using a key derivation function as follows. The KDF is applied to K, generating a chaining key K1 and a message encryption key MK1. MK1 is used to encrypt the first message Alice sends to Bob. To encrypt the next message, the KDF is applied to K1, producing the chaining key K2 and the second message encryption key MK2. MK2 is used to encrypt the second message, and so on. Importantly, keys are deleted as soon as they are no longer needed. For example, the initial key K is deleted after K1 and MK1 are generated. MK1 is deleted immediately after encrypting the first message. To see why forward secrecy is achieved, consider the scenario where an attacker Eve compromises Alice's device and learns K2 and MK2. Of course, Eve can compute K3, MK3, K4, MK4, and so on. However, Eve cannot recover MK1 because the KDF is assumed to be pre-image resistant. This means that she cannot decrypt past messages encrypted with MK1. Thus, even if an adversary obtains a chaining key at a certain point in time. They can only decrypt future messages, not past ones. Post-compromise security is achieved by integrating fresh ECDH shared secrets into the ratcheting process. This means that the key derivation function takes an additional input DHI. The DHI values are ECDH shared secrets derived from ephemeral elliptic curve public keys XI and YI. Here, XI is generated by Alice, whereas YI is contributed by Bob. Now, suppose that an attacker Eve compromised Alice's device and learns K2 and MK2. To compute K3 and MK3, Eve would also need DH3, which requires knowledge of the ephemeral secret keys x3 or y3 that were used to derive DH3. If Eve fails to obtain these ephemeral secret keys, perhaps because the compromised devices have been patched or restored, she loses access to all future session keys. As a result, messages encrypted using MK3, MK4, and beyond remain secure, even though K2 and MK2 were previously compromised. Signal relies on several cryptographic primitives. I mentioned before, AES is used in CBC mode with a 128-bit IV and a 256-bit secret key for encryption. HMAC with SHA-256 as the underlying hash function serves as the MAC scheme for authentication using a 256-bit key. Signal uses key derivation functions, either HMAC or something called hash KDF. The details of hash KDF aren't important for this lecture. For elliptic curve cryptography, Signal uses the elliptic curve curve25519. There are many elliptic curve key pairs in Signal. I'll denote a private key by a lowercase letter, for example x, and the corresponding public key by an uppercase letter, here capital X. As I mentioned, Signal uses ECDH for key agreement. It also uses EDDSA, which is an ECDSA-like signature scheme. The details of EDDSA aren't important for this lecture. The Signal protocol consists of three main stages: registration, root key establishment, and message transmission. In registration, Alice and Bob install the app, verify their identities with WhatsApp, and upload their public keys to WhatsApp. Root key establishment is executed when Alice and Bob connect for the first time on WhatsApp. They establish a shared secret key called the root key. In message transmission, Alice and Bob derive session keys from the root key and other parameters. These session keys are then used to encrypt and authenticate their messages. Note that all messages exchanged between Alice and Bob are routed through WhatsApp servers. Their communications with WhatsApp are encrypted and authenticated using a custom-designed TLS-like protocol. Finally, it is assumed that Alice and Bob always delete the secret key as soon as it is no longer needed. This practice is essential for forward secrecy and post-compromise security. I won't explicitly mention this when I describe the Signal protocol. After downloading and installing the WhatsApp app, Alice sends the following information to WhatsApp: her identifier IDA, which is her phone number. WhatsApp verifies that Alice is the owner of the phone number by sending a challenge to that number. Alice must respond to the challenge. This eliminates the need for a password. Alice only needs her phone and ownership of the phone number. Alice sends her long-term public key A, which is an elliptic curve point with integer a being her corresponding long-term secret key. She sends her medium-term public key U, again an elliptic curve point with integer u being her corresponding medium-term secret key. She sends her EDDSA signature on U using a as her private signing key. She also sends a list of one-time public keys S1, S2, up to SL. Again, these are all elliptic curve points. Alice securely stores the corresponding secret keys a, u, S1, S2, up to SL. Alice periodically updates her medium-term public key U and also sends a new list of one-time public keys after they have all been used. Similarly, Bob sends to WhatsApp his identifier, his long-term public key B, his medium-term public key V, his signature on V, and his list of one-time public keys T1, T2, up to TL. Suppose now that Alice wishes to connect with Bob. Here, Alice acts as the initiator, while Bob is the responder. Alice begins by sending a request to WhatsApp to initiate a session with Bob. In response, WhatsApp provides Alice with Bob's long-term public key B, his medium-term public key V, his signature on V, and the next unused one-time public key. Let's say it's T1. After sending T1, WhatsApp deletes it to ensure that each one-time public key is used only once. Alice verifies the signature on V using B as the verification key. She then generates an ephemeral key pair Z and computes 4 ECDH shared secrets A times V, Z times B, Z times V, and Z times T1. Using these shared secrets, she derives the 256-bit root key root 0 by applying a key derivation function to their concatenation. To compute these ECDH secrets, Alice combines her long-term secret key a and her ephemeral secret key z with Bob's medium-term public key V, his long-term public key B, and his one-time public key T1. Since Alice sends A and Z to Bob, he can also compute the root key root 0 using his long-term secret key b, his medium-term secret key v, and his one-time secret key T1. Neither WhatsApp nor any third party can derive these ECDH shared secrets VA, BZ, VZ, and T1Z, and thus cannot compute root 0.
Why use 4 ECDH shared secrets to derive root 0? This enhances security by protecting Alice and Bob, even if some of their secret keying material is compromised. For example, if an adversary learns Bob's medium-term private key V, they still cannot compute root 0 without also knowing BZ or T1Z. Finally, Alice and Bob must verify that they have computed the same root key root 0, and that no one else can compute it. In other words, Alice and Bob need the assurance that they are not victims of a malicious intruder in the middle attack. A potential attack could occur if WhatsApp provides Alice and Bob with its own public keys, instead of their real ones. However, if Alice is certain that B is Bob's legitimate long-term public key, and the signature is valid, she can trust that V is Bob's genuine medium-term public key. This assurance means that Bob is the only party with knowledge of V and B, making him the only party capable of computing the ECDH shared secrets VA, BZ, and VZ, and ultimately deriving root 0. Bob gets similar assurances if he is certain that he has Alice's legitimate long-term public key A.
How can Alice and Bob ensure that they have authentic copies of each other's long-term public keys A and B? In WhatsApp, this verification is performed manually. Alice and Bob derive a 60-digit number by hashing their identifiers along with their long-term public keys. This number is displayed on their screens, both as a barcode and in decimal form. If Alice and Bob are physically together, they can scan each other's barcodes for verification. If they are apart, they can compare the numbers, perhaps by reading them aloud over the phone or using another secure method. If the numbers match, then they can be confident that they possess authentic copies of each other's long-term public keys, ensuring that only they can compute the corresponding root key, root 0. This verification is essential to prevent a potential malicious intruder in the middle attack by WhatsApp or another third party. However, in practice, it is rarely performed. To complete the explanation of message transmission, we must detail how Alice and Bob manage the numerous secret keys required for encrypting and decrypting messages throughout their connection. Alice maintains 3 keychains: a root keychain that seeds the other 2 chains, a sending keychain for deriving encryption keys, and a receiving keychain for deriving decryption keys. Similarly, Bob maintains 3 keychains: a root keychain that is identical to Alice's root keychain, a receiving keychain which is identical to Alice's sending keychain, and a sending keychain that is identical to Alice's receiving keychain. I'll explain the message transmission protocol using the following example. The flow of messages is described only from Alice's perspective and not Bob's. Suppose Alice begins by sending 4 messages to Bob. This series of messages concludes when Alice receives the first message from Bob, referred to here as M121. Alice then receives a second message from Bob before sending her next message, M221, to Bob. This marks the end of Alice's first receiving chain and the beginning of her second sending chain. After sending 1 message, Alice receives 3 messages from Bob, as shown here. This ends Alice's second sending chain and begins her second receiving chain. Note that the superscript represents the message number within a sending chain or receiving chain. The first subscript indicates the number of Alice's sending or receiving chains, while the second subscript shows whether the message is part of her sending chain when the 2 subscripts are equal, or her receiving chain when the second subscript is 1 more than the first. As I previously mentioned, Alice maintains a root keychain. This root keychain is used to seed both Alice's sending and receiving keychains. The root keychain is seeded with the root key root 0 and is supplemented by ECDH shared secret keys. For example, SK110 seeds Alice's first sending keychain, which produces the encryption keys used for the messages in Alice's first sending chain. RK120 is used to seed Alice's first receiving keychain, producing the decryption keys for the messages in her first receiving chain. SK220 is used to seed Alice's second sending keychain, which produces the encryption keys for messages in her second sending chain. RK230 is used to seed Alice's second receiving keychain, which generates the decryption keys for the messages in her second receiving keychain. And so on. The ECDH shared secret keys are defined as follows. DH11 is derived from Alice's first ephemeral public key X1 and Bob's medium-term public key V. Alice includes X1 in the messages she sends to Bob in her first sending chain. DH12 is derived from Alice's first ephemeral public key X1 and the first ephemeral public key Y2 that Bob sends to Alice. This Y2 is included in the messages Bob sends in his first sending chain, which corresponds to Alice's first receiving chain, and so on. I've written here the sequence of steps that Alice executes for the example on the previous slide. Finally, let me describe how a message is encrypted and decrypted. Consider a message MIIJ. This is the jth message that Alice is sending in her ith sending chain. Alice uses the secret key MSKIIJ, which is the jth key in her ith sending keychain. She parses MSKIIJ to obtain a 128-bit IV and two 256-bit keys K1 and K2. She encrypts the message MIIJ using AES in CBC mode, with IV as the initialization vector and K1 as the encryption key. Alice then computes the HMAC tag of the resulting ciphertext and additional data, including the long-term public keys A and B, her ephemeral key XI, the message index J, and the length Li-1 of her previous sending keychain. Bob computes MSKIIJ, verifies the HMAC tag, decrypts the ciphertext to recover the message MIIJ. Note that Alice also includes her ephemeral key Z in all the messages in her first sending chain. The message index J helps Bob determine which key to use, even if messages arrive out of order or are lost. The length Li-1 of Alice's previous sending chain informs Bob when he has received all Alice's messages from that sending chain. This allows him to delete all keys, which enhances post-compromise security.
Here are the main references we used to prepare this video. Signal is a well-designed protocol that provides robust end-to-end security while also ensuring important properties such as forward secrecy and post-compromise security. It scales very well to billions of users who send tens of billions of messages daily. Most impressively, it operates without relying on a trusted third party, remains user-friendly, and does not require passwords.